So let me block out the code for you again. We're going to require a number of things, a few variables. We're also going to need a number of nodes to be put down, some code that will set the inputs to these nodes, and we're going to use a counter later on. Let's just first start with creating a file node. So let's say file underscore node is who.node, and we're going to put it inside this node. So we just put down a dot, and we use the create node function. And the type of node we want is a file node, which is like so. So now in theory, if we hit our import button, it should drop down a file node for each OBJ file that starts with a 0 in that folder. So we should have 10 if that's correct. Let's hit import and see if that works. Dive inside. And sure enough, here we go. Let's hit L to lay them out properly. And we can see that we have file 1 all the way through file 10. So that's 10 of them. That's correct. So let's delete them, go back up, and continue writing our code. We need to set the file parameter for it to actually be importing any kind of file. So let's do that. Let's do file node.parm, and the parm is called file.set. All right, there we go. We need to have a file path for these buildings, and this is where these variables come in. So what are we going to set there? Let's just call it the full path. And this is a variable we have not created yet, so let's create that. Let's say full path is buildings path, which is the path to the folder that we have. This is a string plus file. So we're already retrieving file, right? It's going to find us something number.obj. So if we concatenate those two, we should get the actual buildings we need. Let's try that again. Import. And sure enough, in my viewport, something's popping up. And if we hit L again, we can see that these actually have the building numbers. So that works. Again, let's remove them and continue writing our code. Now further down the line, I'm going to need a bounding box because I'm going to have to calculate the size of these buildings. Let's create a variable called bounding box or bbox and say it's who.node and create node. So we're going to create a bounding box node for each of these buildings, and that one's called bound. And then what we can do here is say bbox.setFirstInput, and we're going to pass in the file node we just created. So what this does, this function, it sets the first input of the bounding box node to be the file node. And if we do this every time for a node, we can actually construct a node chain that way. So other than this, we also need an attributes node. I'm just keeping spaces in between the different nodes so it becomes easier for you to read. It might not necessarily be PEP 8, but I think in this case it really enhances readability. So we're going to create an attributes node, and on these buildings we want certain attributes to be present. So while we're doing that, we're also going to set the attributes. So let's create them. Who.node.create node attrib create. So now we've got this code. Let's try and run that and see what happens. And sure enough, that worked. So now we can see that we have all these file nodes containing the buildings that we want. They have a bounding box connected to them. And I have the attributes here. Of course, we need to wire them up first before that will work. Just wanted to make sure that it will work. So let's go ahead and delete those. Go back up. So any code underneath here, I'm just going to create the attributes. But before that, let's wire them up correctly. Let's do that in the next clip.